This is the story of Nicodemus, a respected teacher, a man of power, a Pharisee trusted by kings who snuck away in the night to meet a carpenter from Nazareth. It's a story about truth that begins in secret and ends in the open. Because faith may start in the dark, but real love for Jesus always steps into the light. It was past midnight, and the upper roofs of Jerusalem were alive with flickering lights. Most people didn't notice. To them, rooftops were for sleeping or drying figs, but not for Nicodemus, not tonight. He sat alone near the edge of his villa's roof, surrounded by expensive scrolls, jars of ink, and clay cups that hadn't been touched in hours. His sandals were off, his robe was wrinkled, and for the first time in decades, his mind wasn't sure what to believe. He watched the lights of the temple far below, steady, golden, unmoving, and then glanced toward the narrow alley where a single lantern moved like a firefly through the dark. His guest was coming, the one man no one expected him to meet: Jesus. Nicodemus paced. He was too old to be nervous, but he was a ruler after all, a scholar. He'd stood in marble courts and debated foreign dignitaries. He had delivered rulings before Roman governors and earned the respect of the entire Sanhedrin. But this carpenter, this barefoot miracle worker, he made Nicodemus feel like a child again, and that wasn't a bad thing. It just scared him. He paused to think back to a time before scrolls and courtrooms, before people called him rabbi or bowed when he entered, to the dusty village where he was born, the son of a sandal maker with big dreams and calloused hands. His father had taught him how to measure leather, but it was his mother who taught him scripture. She said, "If you chase God with your mind and your heart, you'll always find him." He had chased knowledge. Now he was chasing truth. A footstep, then another. Nicodemus turned quickly as Jesus stepped into the lantern light. He didn't bow, didn't smile. He just said, "You've been waiting." Nicodemus nodded. "You said to come when it was quiet." Jesus sat down cross-legged near the clay jars. "I didn't just mean the city." Nicodemus swallowed hard. "I know you're from God. No one can do what you do unless God is with him, but I don't understand." Jesus nodded. "You want to see the kingdom, but you haven't been born again." Nicodemus blinked. "Born again? I'm old. I can't go back inside the womb." Jesus smiled. "You're still thinking with flesh, but spirit is different. The wind moves. You don't see where it's going, but you know it's real." Nicodemus looked down at his hands, the hands that once flipped scrolls with pride, the hands that people trusted to give answers. Now they just trembled. "How?" he asked. "How can someone change if they've been this way for so long?" Jesus leaned in. "For God so loved the world, Nicodemus, that he gave his only son." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was holy. Jesus stood. "You came here in the dark, but one day you'll stand in the light." Nicodemus didn't fully understand what that meant. Not yet. But his heart did something his head hadn't done in years. It believed. The scroll chamber was colder than usual. Set deep beneath the Western Temple walls, it was carved directly into bedrock. No windows, just long tables, sealed shelves, and iron lanterns that hissed when lit. This was where the oldest records were kept: decrees from kings, prophecies from long-dead men, and warnings no one read anymore. Nicodemus had the key. Only 7 men did. He pulled the door closed behind him, lit the lantern with shaking hands. and sat alone at a scroll-covered table, his breath rising in little clouds. He didn't come to teach. He came to find something, anything, that would make sense of last night. He ran his fingers across the spines of the scrolls. Isaiah, Daniel, Ezekiel. He unrolled one quickly. He will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God. He whispered it out loud, and it chilled him. He pulled another. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Another. They will look on the one they have pierced. He sat back, stunned. The words had been there all along, but now they felt alive. Footsteps echoed behind the far shelf, too soft for a guard, too slow for a student. Nicodemus blew out the lantern, held his breath, and listened. A figure appeared in the archway. "Still up early?" came a voice. Gamaliel, elder, councilman, friend. Nicodemus smiled barely. "Couldn't sleep," he said. Gamaliel entered, brushing dust from his robe. "Any particular prophecy calling to you?" "All of them," Nicodemus muttered. Gamaliel studied him for a moment, then said, "Word is spreading about that Galilean." Nicodemus tensed. Gamaliel continued, "Some say he healed a man at Bethesda on the Sabbath." Nicodemus stood slowly. "Do you think it's true?" Gamaliel looked directly at him. "I think truth has a way of getting louder the more people try to silence it." Nicodemus waited, hoping for more. But Gamaliel turned to leave. At the doorway he added, "Careful where you search, old friend. Scrolls aren't the only things being watched down here." And then he was gone. Nicodemus stood there in the dark, heart pounding, mind racing. And for the first time, the Chamber of Scrolls didn't feel like a place of wisdom. It felt like a tomb. Because when truth comes alive, you can't keep it buried, even under stone. The Hall of Hewn Stone stood like a giant jaw inside the temple wall. It was shaped like a half moon, its limestone ceiling soaring high overhead. Sunlight pierced through narrow slits in the roof, casting thin beams across the floor like stripes of judgment. This was where Israel's 71 rulers met, where laws were debated, where truth was questioned, where sentences were spoken like thunder. And today, it was full. A beggar stood in the center, poorly dressed, eyes wide, and very much healed. "It was on the Sabbath," a priest snarled. "You said the man told you to carry your mat." "Yes, Rabbi," the beggar said. "I didn't know who he was. He just said, 'Pick up your mat and walk.'" "And you did?" snapped another. "Yes," the man said, almost laughing, "and I haven't stopped since." The courtroom stirred. Some smirked, others scowled. And Nicodemus sat among them, quiet, unreadable. One of the elders leaned toward him. "You're unusually quiet, Brother Nicodemus. Any thoughts?" Nicodemus looked at the man in the center. His legs worked. His eyes sparkled. He had been changed. That was undeniable. "I believe," Nicodemus began. Heads turned. "I believe we should be careful not to condemn what we haven't understood." A few murmurs, a few glances, but one voice barked loudest. "So now you defend lawbreakers?" The beggar interrupted suddenly. "Look, I don't know anything about laws. I only know this. I was broken, and now I'm whole. You want to argue about what day it happened? Fine. But I'm standing here because of him, and if that's a crime, then your laws are sicker than I was." The room fell silent. One scribe scribbled furiously. Another elder fumed. The high priest stood slowly and announced, "This man is excused, for now." Guards pulled him away. Nicodemus rose from his seat and walked out, robes brushing the stone floor like thunder. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't need to. Outside, under the temple's outer colonnade, he sat down and watched the beggar limp away, still smiling, still changed. Micah, the young scroll runner, appeared beside him with water. "Do you think they'll call him in next?" the boy asked. Nicodemus didn't answer, because deep inside, he hoped they wouldn't. Not yet. He wasn't ready to choose, not publicly, not until, "One day you will stand in the light." The words returned like a tide, and for the first time, Nicodemus wondered, what would it cost him to stay silent again? The entrance was hidden beneath a broken well cover near the edge of the old city wall, just beyond the reach of temple guards and too low for patrol horses to bother with. Nicodemus lit a single torch and slipped into the tunnel like a thief. He wasn't wearing his council robe tonight, just a plain outer cloak dusted from travel. The city above buzzed with Passover preparations, but below, only darkness and fear. He walked slowly down the narrow path, stone walls dripping with water, the smell of earth and firewood thick in the air. This was where the rejected lived, the ones exiled for disease, shame, or poverty. And now, it was also where followers of Jesus were starting to hide. At the third bend, a whisper stopped him. "Nicodemus?" He turned. A man stepped from the shadows holding a lantern made of broken pottery. His hands were shaking. Behind him stood a woman clutching a child, eyes wide, hair tangled, but the girl smiled. Her legs were strong, too strong. Nicodemus blinked. "You." "She was healed," the mother whispered. 3 days ago. He touched her shoulder, that's all. She hasn't limped since." The father looked around, nervous. "They're looking for us," he said. "The Pharisees heard. They're saying we're spreading lies. They threatened my cousin just for asking about Jesus." "Please," the mother said. "We heard you spoke gently at the council. We thought, maybe." Nicodemus stared at the girl. So young, so alive. He'd seen sickness like hers before, bones like dry reeds, joints too stiff. And now? She ran her hand across the tunnel wall with wonder, like someone seeing the world for the first time. "I can't hide you forever," Nicodemus said softly. "We don't want hiding," the father replied. "We want truth and safety." Nicodemus reached into his pouch and handed over a folded parchment. It was the symbol of his house, a seal of protection for 1 week. The man took it in silence, no words, just tears. As Nicodemus turned to go, the little girl ran forward. She hugged his leg, quick as a blink, then stepped back. "Thank you," she whispered. Then she added, almost playfully, "Your eyes are sad, but your heart is getting louder." Nicodemus froze, then smiled, a little. But that smile faded the moment he emerged from the tunnel into the night. Because waiting at the well cover, torch in hand, was Shammai, his rival on the council. "Well, well," Shammai said, raising his torch. "Evening stroll, brother." Nicodemus hid the shock on his face. "Some of us care for the poor. And some of us protect what's holy. Shammai replied, "Tell me, have you heard of this blasphemer they call Jesus?" Nicodemus paused. "Only rumors." "Then we must find the truth," Shammai said, eyes narrowing, "before the people believe it." As Nicodemus walked away, his heart thundered. He had just committed treason with kindness. And the line between councilman and disciple was getting thinner by the hour. The stone gallery wasn't on any temple map. Most didn't even know it existed. Hidden behind a carved wall in the upper priest's corridor, the gallery was used only for emergency war councils or private decisions the public was never meant to hear. The walls were smooth marble, the air smelled of cedar and candle wax, and the faces inside were cloaked in shadow. Nicodemus stood at the center of a long, cold table. Around it sat the highest voices in Israel. Caiaphas, the high priest, was among them, his ringed fingers steepled beneath his chin. So was Shammai, eyes glinting like he already knew something Nicodemus didn't. No greetings, no ceremony, just tension. "You've seen the crowds," Caiaphas began. "You've heard the chants. Jesus of Nazareth is poisoning the people with stories and signs." Nicodemus remained silent. "He eats with sinners," Shammai added, "touches lepers, breaks Sabbath law, and worse, he speaks like he is God." Someone else leaned in. "And he's just clever enough to avoid arrest. Until now." Caiaphas slid a parchment across the table. On it, a plan, a public challenge, a staged question, an attempt to trap Jesus in front of witnesses. And Nicodemus saw his own name in the margin. "We want you to ask it," Caiaphas said flatly. Nicodemus blinked. "Why me?" "You're measured," Shammai said. "Respected. He might answer you without seeing the snare." Nicodemus swallowed. They wanted to use him, not as a seeker, but as bait. He looked around the room, men he'd taught with, prayed beside, studied scripture with since he was young, and suddenly he felt like a stranger. "What if he is who he says he is?" Nicodemus asked carefully. The room shifted. Caiaphas's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll still stop him," he said. "Better for one man to die than for the whole nation to fall." Nicodemus felt the breath catch in his chest. He wanted to speak, to push back, to stand. But the words got caught behind years of politics and fear. "I'll consider it," he said. Shammai smiled thinly. "We knew you'd be reasonable." The meeting ended in silence. But as Nicodemus walked down the winding corridor behind the chamber, he noticed something. A servant girl, no older than 10, was kneeling in the hallway, arranging oil lamps. She looked up at him with eyes too wise for her age. "You were quiet in there," she said. Nicodemus blinked. "Excuse me." She didn't smile. "They were loud, but you were quiet. You're the only one who looked scared." He stared at her, stunned. But before he could speak, she whispered, "Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones God is talking to the loudest." She returned to the lamps. "And Nicodemus?" He walked into the cold night, heart thudding, because the council had its trap. And now he had to choose whether to tighten the noose or protect the very man they were trying to destroy. The shop had once sold cinnamon bark, myrrh pods, and crushed saffron to passing merchants. Now it sat boarded up, its shutters nailed, its door crooked, its windows empty like eyes that had seen too much. But beneath the shop, people were gathering. Not merchants, not priests, believers. Nicodemus ducked through the cellar hatch, torch in hand, and stepped into the tight, musty room below. The walls were lined with broken jars. The air carried traces of pepper and clove, but the warmth had long since gone. Inside sat 5 people, all young, all wide-eyed, all watching him. "You're late," said the oldest, a woman named Ruthia, her hand protectively on a pouch that held letters written by Jesus himself. "I had to cross the temple court without being followed," Nicodemus whispered. He pulled the hatch closed behind him. "They're planning to trap him," he said without ceremony. A public confrontation, a question designed to twist his own words. Ruthia's jaw clenched. "When?" "Sundown. The Olive Quarter. He'll be teaching in the open." Another voice spoke from the corner. Software, shaky. "It's already too late." They all turned. A man stepped forward, thin, nervous. His hands twitched. Nicodemus narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" The man swallowed hard. "My name is Judah. I was with the disciples. I traveled with them for 2 months." "Was?" Ruthia asked. Judah looked down. I left." He reached into his coat and pulled out a coin purse. It jingled. Everyone stared. Nicodemus stepped back. Ruthia whispered, "You sold him out." Judah's voice cracked. "I didn't know what they'd do. I just wanted answers. I thought if he was real, he'd stop them, prove it, fight back, something." Nicodemus clenched his fists. "You gave the council what they needed." Judah dropped to his knees. "But you can still warn him before the Passover. He always stays in Bethany the night before. You could get there before sunrise." Ruthia stood. "Let him go." "What?" Nicodemus asked. "He has to live with it. That's worse than any punishment." Judah ran, out the hatch, into the dark. The room was silent. Then Ruthia turned to Nicodemus. "If you really believe he's the one," she said, "don't just talk about saving him." Nicodemus looked at the pouch in her hands, the letters, the teachings, the promises. Then back at the cellar wall where torchlight flickered across a stone engraving. Someone had carved a single Hebrew word there, hope. He blew out the torch and whispered, "Then I'll go to Bethany," because the trap had been set. But if Nicodemus moved fast enough, he might not just be a man with questions. He might become a man with a purpose. The moon lit the path like spilled silver. Nicodemus pulled his hood low and gripped his travel staff tightly as he moved through the Kidron Valley, following a trail that twisted behind boulders, around tombs, and up the ridge toward Bethany. This wasn't the road people used in daylight. This was the narrow way, used by mourners, grave diggers, and now a Pharisee with a pounding heart. Above him, the stars glittered. Below him, shadows shifted behind every stone. He had already passed 2 roadside shrines, 1 sleeping shepherd, and the broken remains of an overturned Roman wagon. Every step was louder than it should have been. Then, a shape, up ahead. A woman, standing alone beneath a gnarled fig tree, holding a lantern wrapped in cloth to keep the flame dim. Nicodemus froze. She didn't. She spoke first. Are you the one they call Teacher of Israel? His breath caught. Who's asking? She stepped closer. Her face was calm, eyes steady. My name is Martha. Nicodemus lowered his hood. You're Lazarus' sister. She nodded. And Jesus is in our home tonight. He stepped forward, eager. I must speak with him. There's danger, real danger, the council. I know, she interrupted gently. He knows too. Nicodemus stared. You told him? No, she said. He told me, before you ever left the city. She turned toward the path leading up the hill. Come, he's waiting. As they walked, Nicodemus glanced sideways at her. You saw your brother raised from the dead. Yes. Do you still fear what the council might do? Martha smiled without humor. I watched a man walk out of his own tomb. What could they possibly threaten me with now? They reached the top of the hill. The village of Bethany lay just beyond, cloaked in olive trees and quiet homes. Jesus' light was still on, but before they could reach it, Martha stopped and pointed to a low cave along the roadside. It was a tomb, empty, lit with candles. He prays here sometimes, she said. He says it reminds him where this road ends. Nicodemus stepped toward it. The smell of stone and old linens filled the air. In the center was a single mat and a jug of water. Martha whispered, You think you came here to save him. Nicodemus looked up. She continued, But really, he brought you here to save yourself. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Nicodemus at the mouth of the tomb, heart thudding, questions burning, but for the first time. He wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. The first light of morning bled across the horizon like golden ink spilling across parchment. Nicodemus sat at the entrance of the tomb, legs crossed, hands open, eyes red from lack of sleep. Birds stirred in the trees above. The village behind him still slept. But he didn't. He hadn't closed his eyes once. Then, without a sound, a shadow fell across the cave entrance. Nicodemus looked up. Jesus stood there. No guards, no disciples, no crowd, just him, and light behind him, as if the dawn itself was following his every step. You waited, Jesus said gently. Nicodemus rose slowly. I had to. Jesus stepped inside the cave and looked around, at the empty mat, the water jug, the stone walls. It's a fitting place, isn't it? Nicodemus nodded. Strange, Jesus continued. Most men are afraid of tombs. You came here for answers. Nicodemus took a breath. The council has made its decision. I know. They plan to trap you. I know that too. They want me to help. Jesus turned to him fully now. Not angry, not surprised, only still. And will you? Silence. A long silence. Nicodemus stared at the floor. I've spent my life mastering the law, memorizing truth. And then you came, and you are the truth. But I'm still afraid. Jesus nodded. Then you're close. Close? Jesus stepped toward him, voice calm. Real faith doesn't start with certainty. It starts with surrender. Nicodemus blinked. Surrender of what? Jesus said, your reputation, your comfort, your silence. The wind stirred outside the tomb, The sun crept farther across the hill, and Nicodemus realized what was happening. He wasn't just meeting a teacher anymore. He was standing before the Lamb. "I'm not ready," he whispered. "You're more ready than you think," Jesus replied. A moment passed. Then Jesus added, "The light doesn't wait for you to feel brave. It shines, and you step into it, or you don't." Nicodemus stared into his eyes, and for the first time, he saw the cross in them, not just the sacrifice, the love. Then Jesus turned to leave. But before he did, he said, "I'll see you soon. There will be a garden and a tomb again, and when that day comes, bring the spices." Nicodemus didn't understand. Not yet. But he would. Because the teacher didn't come to win debates. He came to give himself away. Jerusalem was buzzing. Not like festival buzzing, tense buzzing. Whispers flew like arrows between rooftops, merchants packed early, soldiers tightened their routes. And everywhere Nicodemus went, he heard the same word again and again: Hosanna. Jesus had entered the city, not with an army, but on a donkey. And the people had thrown their cloaks on the road, waving palm branches like battle flags and shouting praises. Now, he was in the open. No more shadows, no more secret rooftops. Nicodemus stood at the corner of a stone stairway near the market square colonnade. Above him, hundreds of people pressed into a semicircle around Jesus. He was teaching. Again. In full view. Pharisees stood at the edge, robes stiff, jaws clenched, arms crossed. Among them, Shammai. Nicodemus approached cautiously, weaving through the crowd. He listened. Jesus was speaking in parables, stories that sounded simple but landed like thunder. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Some people gasped, others clapped. But Nicodemus felt his chest tighten, because he realized this wasn't just a teaching, it was a warning. Suddenly, Shammai stepped forward, loud, calculated. "Teacher," he called, "we have a question." Jesus looked at him calmly. "Ask it." "If a woman is caught in adultery," Shammai said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "and the law says to stone her, what do you say?" The crowd stilled. Even the birds stopped chirping. Nicodemus froze. This was it. The trap. If Jesus said stone her, he would lose the people who followed him for mercy. If he said don't, they'd accuse him of rejecting the law. Either way, they thought they'd win. But Jesus knelt. He drew something in the dust with his finger. No one could see what it was. Then he stood slowly and said, "Let the one who is without sin cast the first stone." Silence. A stone dropped. Then another. The crowd began to murmur. One by one. They all backed away, even Shammai. Jesus turned to the woman who had been thrown to the ground sobbing in the dirt. "Where are your accusers?" he asked. She looked around, confused. "Gone, sir." "Then neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." Nicodemus felt the breath leave his lungs. He looked at Shammai, at Caiaphas, who stood watching from a distance, at the people who had come ready for blood but left in silence. And then Jesus glanced right at him, not with anger, with invitation. Nicodemus stepped back into the shadows of the colonnade. not to hide, to breathe, because something inside him was breaking open, and something else was waking up. The doors to the chamber of hewn stone were closed long before midnight. But inside, the council was awake. Dozens of men, dozens of voices, and only one goal. Nicodemus entered late, his cloak dusted from the streets. The room smelled of burnt oil, stress, and scroll glue. The lamps flickered more than usual, as if even the flames knew this night was crooked. At the far end, Caiaphas stood tall. Behind him, Shammai, and beside them, 2 guards with hands on hilts. Nicodemus took his seat, not with ease, with dread. "This man," Caiaphas began, "this Galilean, this Jesus, he blasphemes in public, he draws crowds with lies, he claims power over life and death." He paused. "The Romans are watching." Another pause. "The people are restless." Then he added coldly, "Better for one man to die than for the whole nation to be crushed." Nicodemus shifted in his seat. Across from him, an elder banged his fist on the table. "The crowds called him king this week, a king. If Caesar hears that—" Others nodded. Shammai looked around dramatically. "We are the keepers of the law. If we allow this man to continue, we betray Moses. We betray God." A pause. Caiaphas raised a scroll. "We vote now." Silence. Then a name was read. "Ben Toviah?" "Aye." "Matanel?" "Aye." "Shammai?" "Aye." One by one, each voice echoed. Until "Nicodemus?" All eyes turned, even the guards, even the younger scribes tucked in the back. Nicodemus swallowed hard. He thought of the healed man by the pool, of the woman spared from stones, of the whisper in the tomb, "Bring the spices." And louder still, the words Jesus had spoken in secret, now blazing in his memory like fire. "The light doesn't wait for you to feel brave. It shines." He stood, slowly, voice calm but firm. Does our law condemn a man without hearing him, without knowing what he has done? Gasps. Caiaphas narrowed his eyes. "Nicodemus, this is not the time." "It is exactly the time," he thundered suddenly. "We are judges, not executioners." Shammai hissed, "Then you side with him?" Nicodemus met his eyes. "I side with truth." The room broke into argument, yelling, fists, torches flaring. But Nicodemus didn't sit back down. He stepped out of the circle and walked out. Down the dark corridor, past the guards, past the seal of the council. He didn't look back, because the courtroom had cast its vote, and now he had cast his. The noise reached him first, shouting, feet pounding, metal clinking. Then the orange glow of torches rose over the city wall like fire ants marching through the night. Nicodemus stood on a rooftop near the outer olive groves, heart pounding, watching the line of men descend into the trees. They were headed toward Gethsemane. He didn't need to ask why. He already knew. He ran. Down the stairs, through alleyways still wet from washing, past the homes of families who had once begged him for rulings he now realized meant nothing. He ran with dust in his beard and regret in his lungs. But when he reached the edge of the garden, he was too late. A crowd had already formed, soldiers, priests, and one man standing alone in the middle. Jesus! He was not struggling, not pleading, just waiting. Like he'd expected every chain, like he'd chosen them. Nicodemus moved quietly around the back, staying in the trees. He spotted Judas standing off to the side, face pale, coin bag still tied to his waist like a brand of shame. And near the fire stood Caiaphas. "Is this your plan?" Nicodemus whispered under his breath. Then his eyes landed on Peter, eyes wide, sword shaking. Jesus looked at him and said gently, "Put your sword away." And he let them take him. They tied his hands. They led him through the grove, past the place where he had prayed, past the hill where Nicodemus had first heard him teach, and into the night. Nicodemus followed at a distance. He knew where they were going. The high priest's courtyard. By the time he arrived, Jesus was inside, on trial in the dark. Guards mocked him, spit, struck his face, and Nicodemus. He watched from behind a stone column, mouth shut, fists clenched, tears on his cheeks. He could still hear Shammai's voice. "You side with him?" And Jesus' voice, "The light shines, and you step into it." A rooster crowed. Peter wept. The sky turned from black to gray, and Nicodemus made a vow in his heart, "If I cannot stop this, I will not hide from it." It was called Golgotha, the place of the skull. It stood beyond the northern gate, just high enough to be seen from the temple wall and low enough for the blood to run back toward the city streets. 3 crosses stood on the ridge, but only one carried the silence of heaven. Jesus. Nicodemus had followed at a distance, not hidden, not running, just walking, slow, stunned, unable to look away. He saw the Roman soldiers casting lots for Jesus' robe. He heard the insults from priests who still wore clean garments as they mocked a bleeding Savior. And he watched Jesus look at them, not with hatred, but with mercy. "Father, forgive them." Near the base of the cross, a woman wept, Jesus' mother. Beside her stood John, one of his followers, and behind them, Joseph of Arimathea, another secret believer, another man of rank who had stayed silent too long. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something passed between them, wordless, weighty, final. As the sky darkened and thunder rolled without rain, Nicodemus stepped forward, out from behind the stone arch, out of the shadows of the elite, out where everyone could see. He walked straight to Joseph. "We can't leave him like this," Nicodemus said. Joseph nodded, eyes shining. "I've already spoken to Pilate. I claim the body." Nicodemus opened the bundle in his arms. 75 pounds of spices, a burial offering fit for a king. "I brought what I could," he whispered. And together, 2 men, wealthy, educated, once too careful, took down the broken body of the Son of God. They wrapped him gently, spoke no words, laid him in Joseph's tomb near a garden just outside the city. Nicodemus stayed long after the others left. He sat beside the sealed stone door as stars returned overhead. He remembered the rooftop, the scroll chamber, the vote, the chains, and now, the grave. He had followed Jesus in secret, but now he had followed him all the way to the tomb. Jerusalem felt broken. Not like it had been attacked, like it had held its breath and forgotten how to exhale. The temple gates creaked with no wind, shops opened late. No one shouted in the market. The usual street debates. Silent. Even the priests who once shouted from balconies walked quickly, heads down, avoiding questions they once delighted in answering, because something had happened, and no one knew what to do with it. Nicodemus walked past the same vendors who used to bow to him. Now they looked away. A few stared. One murmured behind his hand, "That's him, the one who buried him." Nicodemus didn't flinch. He wasn't hiding anymore. Let them see. He returned to the tomb garden that morning, not because he expected to see Jesus, but because he couldn't stay away. He arrived to find the stone rolled aside, the grave cloths folded, the air inside sweet with spices. His spices, but no body. A gardener was nearby, trimming fig branches. Nicodemus approached cautiously. "Do you know what happened here?" The man looked up, smiled gently. "No one took him," he said. He walked out. Nicodemus blinked. "What?" "I said—" The man stood tall, eyes full of light, voice steady. He walked out. Nicodemus staggered backward. He recognized the voice, the kindness, the power, but the man was gone. Vanished behind the trees. He fell to his knees, hands trembling, tears falling freely now, not from grief, from awe. He whispered, "He told me this would happen. He told me in the tomb." And somewhere inside him, something shattered. Not his faith, his fear. Because what could man do to him now, when the grave itself had failed, when the dead could rise? He stood, turned toward the city, and for the first time in his long, careful life, he smiled in the sunlight. The temple steps were hot beneath his feet. Crowds swirled as always, priests in linen, Roman patrols watching, beggars curled in corners. But Nicodemus didn't look down today. He climbed the marble stairs, straight into the fire. The other Pharisees saw him first. Their faces shifted, some in shock, some in scorn. Shammai stepped out from behind a pillar, lips tight. "You should not be here." Nicodemus didn't blink. "You're right." He kept walking. Inside, under the dome of the inner court, voices bounced off the gold and stone. Caiaphas was there. So were half the council. And at the front of the chamber, where sacred scrolls were read and kings were crowned, Nicodemus stopped. "I have something to say," he announced. The room fell into stunned silence. "You voted to silence him," Nicodemus said. "You accused him, mocked him, crucified him." He turned slowly, letting every face see his own. "I buried him." Gasps. "But you did not defeat him." Caiaphas stood. "You dare speak like this? Here?" "Yes," Nicodemus said, stepping closer, "because you fear losing your power, but I have seen power that raises the dead." He reached into his robe, unclipped the seal of his council status, held it in the air, then dropped it on the floor. The sound echoed like thunder in the holy space. "I'm done with titles," he said. "I am no longer a ruler of Israel." He turned to go, then paused at the door and looked back one final time. "I am a servant of the risen King." And then he walked out, into the sunlight. He didn't stop at the gate. He walked into the city, into homes, into corners. He found widows, orphans, travelers, and he told them everything. The rooftop visit, the words in the dark, the hill of skulls, the tomb. the folded cloth, the voice that told him he walked out. And though Nicodemus faded from the Sanhedrin's memory, he lived on in the stories of the early church, the old Pharisee who believed in secret and followed boldly in the end. Because when truth meets fear, love always wins. Followed boldly in the end. Because when truth meets fear, love always wins.